Mr. Anderson, welcome. You're on mute. You have to press the button. There you go.
How about that?
That's better. Have you watched The Matrix?
I have, and for most of my life, I've had to deal with Mr. Anderson.
Mr. So I'm sorry to bring this up again, but The Matrix was my favorite movie, but I think they completely butchered the fourth one. Have you watched the fourth one?
No, no.
It almost feels like they did it on purpose. It almost feels like they did it on purpose. There are a lot of inside jokes in the movie about a studios being forced to redo a franchise after many years and then doing it all like haphazardly and then being terrible. So I think to some extent, my impression, I mean, we're on the outside, but my impression is that they ended up doing it on purpose. Um,
That's
anyway,
that's what a theory. What a theory.
yeah. I am so excited to have you. For those in the audience that don't know you, how about you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career as one of the lizard people?
Yeah, what
Yeah.
does lizard people mean again? What's that?
Venture
Oh,
capitalists.
right. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um, so I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, where
Yeah.
I am recording today, doing a little summer vacation,
Yeah.
and attended the University of Utah, mechanical engineering. Eventually, though, found my way to software while during business school. That sent me to Amazon Web Services, where I was a PM, then Google as a PM, and eventually recruiters brought me to Scale as a VC. Been at Scale now 7 years, and loving it. It's actually, yeah, the lizard life is good.
It is good, man. Well, I keep thinking to myself. I mean, I joke about this lizard people thing, of course. VCs do have this reputation, right? Just as some of you. But I keep thinking that it must be a life that is less. And if you've done both, so maybe you can comment on that. I mean, it sounds less hectic than software in the sense that you don't have to deal with on-call stuff and deal with stuff urgently and life or death and things are broken and I keep thinking to myself, I mean, is there a future for me that I even want in which like I can keep doing technology but not in such a frantic pace? Is that a good representation, or you think it's just
I
nonsense from the outside?
Well, I think that's a worthy aspiration. I don't think VC is the answer. I mean,
Yeah,
I have my own fire alarms.
yeah,
Every now and then, CEOs do things that
yeah.
require the board to get involved, and every now and then, both good and bad. And then new deals pop up that require kind of some urgency. So I think there's just as much maybe interruption. There is a lot more maybe long-term thinking, although I don't know, as a
Yeah.
founder, you do that quite a bit. But I have enjoyed, at least as like corporate PM, I don't feel like when I was at Google or Amazon, it was a lot of like, serve the needs of the VP's imagination.
Yeah.
And I enjoy in venture the kind of long-term speculation, trend seeking. That's quite interesting and intellectual and fun.
Well, as the founder, as a founder, we're always like thinking long term, but then like acting very short term. Like so, I specifically I like a lot to be on our Discord community with our users. And for those of you who don't know me, I bet most of you in the audience know me. Otherwise, what would you be doing here? Although maybe you're bringing your own audience here, Eric. But we did tweet, of course, that you were coming. But like I'm the CEO of Turso, a database company, and I always like to be on Discord and chatting with people and saying, hey, look, just and Discord communities. I mean, there are a lot of people all the time coming in and asking questions, and you have this feeling like I have to answer this in 5 minutes, otherwise this user is going to go use something else, right? But you have to do this at the same time that you have this
Yeah.
long-term thinking of like, okay, but what do I do in a year? What do I do in 2 years? What do I do in 3 years? And what are the trends that we are pursuing here? And one of the things that we always have to pursue as founders is capital. And I remember you may or may not believe me, although I bet you do, that you are the reason I have this podcast. I mean, to some extent, because we were having lunch together. So for those in the audience that are wondering here, like how this idea of the Save File started, which is why this is a special episode for me. I'm having dinner with Eric, and in fact, your partner was supposed to come and she couldn't make it. So it was at the end of the day, just the two of us. And I don't quite recall how we got into the conversation. It might have been I asking you where you are originally from, and then you say Utah. And 110% of the people in Utah are Mormon or things or something like that.
It's either where are you from or why aren't you drinking? Those are kind of the two questions that lead to the same place.
Yeah, you don't drink, I presume, right? Just
right, yeah,
not or coffee at all, and etc.
Right.
No, I knew, and I knew you had a big family. You have how many kids?
Oh, that's true. That's the third, slightly less common route to the same place.
Yeah. How many kids do you have?
5 kids.
5 kids. Yeah. I had Kent Dodds on my podcast a couple of episodes ago, and in fact he came in as the host 2 episodes ago to interview me by his request, and he was saying that like not all Mormons have big families. Some of us only have like small families with like 3 kids. I said, man, 3 kids in comparison is a large family, right?
Yeah.
And I asked you, what I'm going to ask you live again here. How is it to be a religious person in the Silicon Valley, which is an industry where this is not the norm at all? And in fact, many people look down on you. And in fact, as I shared with you during lunch, many years ago, I would have looked down on you. So as the atheist that I was. So how is it for you? Let's start with the blunt question. How is it for you to be a religious person in this industry?
It's fantastic. I mean, I honestly can't complain. I'm sure that you are correct that people look down on me. I mean, I'm actually probably more naive to that than I should be. But I get very little, friction to my face. People are quite pleasant. I've had like a couple interaction. I think actually in big tech, maybe it was a little bit more interesting. Like, I mean, this isn't even actually all that religious, but I remember like the day after Trump was elected, going to work, and there was just like, I remember being called into a special meeting of managers, and people were like, some people who work here may have voted for Trump. Like that was like a new idea that hadn't occurred to many people at Google, and so we have to like, reconcile the fact that there are Trumpers amongst us. And I was like, I come from a state where everybody voted for Trump, I think. But I, aside from just kind of a few odd interactions, it's actually been surprisingly positive, even though I agree that there's not a lot of public support for that.
Don't you have experiences where people will question at least that? I mean, how can you as a smart person believe this kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, that happened at work fairly recently, actually.
Is that right?
I think the topic of religion or miracles or something came up, and somebody was like they couldn't, like, it was almost like they couldn't contain themselves. Like they had this thought so many times. They're like, but you can't possibly believe that, right? Right? Just like say it so that my mind can be put at ease.
Yeah. I had an experience like that in graduation, and I did not know, but this guy sitting right next to me, and it's not like I was a good friend of the person or anything like that. I knew him, and we chatted a couple of times. He wasn't a stranger, but it was also like not amongst my best friends. And turns out this person was very deeply religious, like to a level that it's not is again. I don't know. I don't chat with him in many years, but don't know how he would compare to me, for example, today. But very deeply religious, and his whole life. So this was like the center of his life. And we're sitting next to each other, and then there's the graduation ceremony. I never forgot that. And somebody like the master of ceremony say something about God, not in a religious way, but in a way that like people sometimes may refer to it in public ceremonies.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and then I just turned to the person on my right, which was this guy, and just mocked the whole concept of like, yeah, just that there is no God and stuff like that. And he just looked at me, smile, and said something like, yeah, I mean, there is a God, and he's the most important thing in my life. And but the thing is that I think that in sciences and technology, like I don't want to go into politics here, but first of all, I'm in Canada, so I don't, Trump, no Trump, doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
the thing is that you get so comfortable, right, with the idea that they were all the same. So it's fair game to dunk on those
Yeah.
people here, because
Yeah.
how could they possibly, how could it possibly be here one person that thinks this way or that way? And it leads to those interesting outcomes. But and that doesn't bug you.
I'm sorry. What the assumption, or the
Yeah,
like? Like I'm not in the fraternity of like,
yeah,
hey, aren't these guys silly? You know,
yeah,
people don't turn to me, or they do once and then they realize the mistake and
yeah.
don't do it again.
I've been in both fraternities, I guess. So
Yeah.
turncoat, but which does any of that bug you at all?
Certainly I wish it were more accepting. That would be nice, and
Mm-hmm.
I would feel um it would be fun to be kind of part of the kind of the fraternal conversation, or to joke about this or that with people, maybe more openly. And but what's uh but it hasn't, like I said, I think, maybe actually part of it, honestly, is that I have such a, big family, lots of community elsewhere, that
Yeah.
I don't lean too much on my work and other circles for kind of my social life. Like as we talk about this fraternity, like, and so maybe the fact that I'm not kind of part of those circles kind of works out. I
That's
don't,
yeah.
yeah.
Does that help you? Because I think one of the problems that a lot of people have today, and I'll include myself, because I don't have that at all. That the thing they just described, I just don't have it. I come from my father had 12 siblings, but like it stopped with him. He only had myself and my brother. I moved countries, right? I moved a bunch of places, so I have a very small circle of people to lean on. And I don't know if this is cause, consequence, related, unrelated, but I define myself a lot by my work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just that, which is a problem that I think a lot of people have. Now, I wish it wasn't the case, but I'm not here to BS anybody and portray a picture that is not true. This is unfortunately true. I define myself a lot, and my self worth, I would say, by am I doing well or not? Are things like, and this is a problem. I acknowledge this is a problem, and I think everybody would acknowledge this is a problem. And is it fair to say that the community that you have waiting for you helps you not do this?
Yes, I think on the net, on the whole, it is a more of a help than a hurt. But you also, it's human nature to want to be kind of accepted and even
Yeah.
looked highly upon. So even within my church community or family community, yeah, people naturally want to look good within that community,
Yeah.
and as a society, we've kind of put career as almost the primary vehicle for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there is this counter, maybe more stronger influence where the community also kind of ignores that to a large part. Uh, for example, the way congregations are assembled in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where I'm a member, you they're just geography. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, there's some effort made to kind of loop in diverse socioeconomic populations into a single whole. And so you get kind of like in the peninsula where I'm from, San Francisco Bay Area, you get like a strip of like everything from the bay to the sea, which gives you everything, the hills and kind of more expensive areas to kind of inner city, which I think it creates a different dynamic. And I find myself more, as much concerned with like, how am I serving this group as much as like, do they think I'm somebody special?
Yeah, no, I guess you're right. I mean, and the term ostracism actually come from the Greeks. That's what they would do, and they call this process ostracism. If you're not playing well with the community, they would just ban you from the city.
Yeah.
And being banned from the city in ancient Greece is not the same as being banned from the city today. I mean, the city is your community. How are you going to survive without a human
Yeah.
population to lean on? So it's almost
Yeah.
a death sentence, right? So you always have these pressures. You're right, to fit in and to be a part of some community. What I'm wondering here is if having this community helps you at least not depend that much on the professional one. Because if you compare to me, for example, I pretty much only have and I don't know to which extent, I mean, this is a cause versus consequence, because I lean too much on my profession, therefore I only seek people from my profession to be around. But maybe it's a mechanism that feed on itself, and who knows. But one way or another, like I sometimes I feel like, look, if I'm not doing tech, what am I doing? And you at least have something else to lean on, right?
Yeah, and so there's been some neat studies, and we don't need to go into them, but I'll just say that my personal experience, I think, kind of corroborates the results of those, which are that individuals who have kind of multiple lanes of life and community tend to have better well-being, in part because when one doesn't go well, the others are likely to be doing just fine, and they can kind of lean on those for their self-worth and identity. And so you're right, when like career feels like it's kind of going sideways, I can show up to church on Sunday and to other church activities and feel like, hey, this is all going normal. What's neat is you actually have kind of a role to play also. It's not just like consuming church, but I have like a responsibility, and often those responsibilities are challenging, like a job might be, and present their own kind of reward mechanisms of like, oh, I like this went well, and this was, we achieved a result, and couple that with a little bit of family time and some I play basketball once or twice a week with the same group of guys. I have a few lanes of like self-worth and identity to draw from.
People cannot see you fully. I mean, in one of the things that I've been working remotely for 20 years, so like more than 20 years. At Red Hat, that's what we did. And I always tell that story to people, that back then, we were just a handle. Like you had your IRC handle, and you would join a call with terrible quality once a week, and everybody trying, speaking over each other. You did not know how people look like. Like I did not know how my manager looked like. I work with a lot of people in the Linux kernel. I had no idea how they look like. Today, everybody knows how everybody else looks like, because we are on video and Zoom and pictures and profile pictures and whatnot. The thing we don't know is how tall people are.
Right.
So I met you in person a couple of times, and for those of you in the audience, yes, that you play basketball, Eric, is believable.
not surprising. We should have little height indicators in the corner.
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
Screen,
Yeah. I'm not surprised in the least that you play basketball. I bet you're a good player as well, especially if you've been doing this for a long time.
I didn't play in high school, which I think is where a lot of people develop their game. But I wrestled during the winter, which is not a good tall person sport. I wouldn't recommend it, but I had a great time. And but no, as an adult, nobody wants to wrestle anymore, right? So I had to take up basketball, which has been awesome.
That's great. The community aspect of religion can be a burden as well, can't it? Because like I spoke to Lane, for example, and again, my point here is not you know Lane Wagner.
Not personally, but I enjoyed his episode.
Yeah, you should, man. He's a great guy. In fact, that I was hoping to meet him in Salt Lake City. I'm going to Salt Lake City next week. Turns out he's moving to a town in the border of Nevada, so I don't think I'm going to meet him. He told me the name, but just
Wendover.
Lane. I don't know.
No.
I'm terrible with names. Sometimes I forget my name, and that I don't do, but I mix up my kids' names a lot. But he had this experience of like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore, and that does make it hard. I mean, it's the flip side of the tie bond, right? Just I had a lot of issues, I believe, because I never claim that religious people are like have trouble in society. What I claim is the minorities have trouble in society, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
religious people are minorities in tech.
Yeah.
But if you want to be an atheist in Utah, you are the minority
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
group, right? So just
Yeah.
I,
I think it's getting better, but it certainly was. I mean, there was a time when Utah and Mormon were, like you said, 110%. That was the case. Like,
yeah.
and I can imagine it would have been very hard back then. But especially in Salt Lake and the more urban areas, the ratios are better. And I think there's a lot more awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, you're right. It's like it's hard just because some portion of the population spends a lot more time together than the other, and so you have to somehow make up for that. And yeah.
You've been a Mormon your whole life. You were born into this, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and in which ways do you think this really helped your career, if any, as a technologist, as a venture capitalist? Or
So it's helpful in tech, but especially in venture, to have like a network, people that
mm-hmm.
and trust and have relationships with. And so I do. I probably am. Yeah, I'm like the church gives a lot of social avenues, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of well-connected people in the church, so there's a network benefit, I think, that I think is on the whole, again, net positive. I do think that this like resilience of self-worth and identity from multiple lanes of life is a benefit, and then the church instills, I think, some very practical principles in its
Mm-hmm.
people that I've embraced. Get educated, hard work, frugal living. I getting married young, having kids early. I think those are actually have been positive things on my career. They've given me kind of focus on important
Yeah.
things, and yeah.
And, and I suspect as well that that's one of the things that Ken Dodds brought up, that people make fun of Mormons a lot sometimes, and that there's the Book of Mormon and the Broadway, etc.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah,
I never watched, by the way. I don't know if you did or not, but I never got curious enough to watch it. I just don't. I just know that in general, like, people make fun of the group, but
yeah, yeah.
everybody also trusts you very much, right? One of the things that Ken shared with me is that, like, when people learned that I was Mormon, immediately they trusted me, because they knew I wasn't going to lie to them. I knew, they knew
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was going to play right. Just so to some extent is, reputational as well, right?
It is. I've had some surprising phone calls from people I didn't realize I had that level of relationship with in times of crisis, where
Okay.
they call and say, Eric, my wife or girlfriend left me, and I don't know who to call or what to do, but I thought to call you. And that's kind of a cool experience. It's
Yeah.
also a terrifying one. But
Spider-Man,
uh,
right?
yeah, yeah,
With great powers. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. But you're right that there is probably some trust, hopefully, well earned, or at least returned. But
Well, there's a lot of negative stereotypes about a lot of people, so it's good to have, the good stereotypes for once. I've been a part of, like, yeah, if I'm a part of this group, people just trust me, versus if I'm a part of this group, people automatically distrust me, right? Just
yeah, yeah.
or
A coworker asked me after he found out I
yeah.
was a member of the church if I had a trampoline in my backyard, and
Why is that? Do you guys do?
I was like, I do. And he was like, every Mormon I know has a trampoline, and I was like,
Is that
wow,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, I mean, maybe it just comes with the big kids territory. But
Yeah. And Well, and big houses as well, like because in
Yeah.
Utah, I suppose like you have big houses. Like my neighbor has a trampoline. I'm gonna go ask him if he's Mormon. Although he,
Hopefully the reverse holds. Yes.
and you've done missions as well, I suppose, as everybody else. And
Yeah. I was, my older sister had gone to Taiwan, Mandarin speaking. My brother had gone to Romania, and I studied a little bit of Spanish. I was kind of hoping for like Argentina, and I went to Cleveland, Ohio, which
that is
it
not
turned out to be a
Argentina.
lot of
Just
fun. No, it was
yeah,
great. But I was slightly disappointed
and
at the beginning.
no need for any Spanish in Cleveland, Ohio, I presume.
There is a little bit actually. We did have a few
Yeah.
missionaries that were assigned to speak Spanish, as any kind of big city in the U.S. would
Mm-hmm.
have, but no, I didn't speak any.
Awesome. Now here's the question. I guess we want to know. Much like your coworker recently asked you, I want to ask you as well. Do you really believe any of that stuff, or all of that stuff, or is it just a? Because look, when you describe those benefits, those are cultural benefits of being part of a
Yep.
group.
Yeah.
Like in the other day, like even Richard Dawkins were talking about like how over time, supposedly, again, I don't know the full story, but Richard Dawkins has been a staunch atheist for a long time.
Yeah.
And he started seeing some of that backfire, I guess, and started calling himself a cultural Christian, like others have done as well. And the idea here is exactly like that. Look, there are some benefits, as you mentioned. Like, so if I join this group, I can have some benefits in my life that I wouldn't otherwise. It could be the network. Like if you join the Freemasons, you're gonna have a good network as well, right?
Yeah.
Just
True. Yeah.
and principles and etc. So that begs the question: do you really believe that stuff, or is it like or not?
So the short answer is yes, I do.
Yeah.
I think it's worth unpacking before I kind of
Yeah.
subscribe to something what this stuff
Yeah.
means. But I think it's useful because there's some nuance here, but also I think one of the things I've come to appreciate because I think about this quite a bit, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
is that I think people's perception, at least my own, of even growing up in the church, of who God is and what it is we're kind of subscribing to, is varies quite a bit, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, in general, yes, I do.
So let's unpack it. What is how do you view that, and what in what you? So first, I think we should talk about like how do you view God and your relationship with Him, but also in what do you anchor this? Like how much have you looked into? Like okay,
Yeah.
this is why I believe what I believe versus like I grew up with this stuff, right?
So there's like two ways to kind of have this conversation, because I think one is like a more logical, rational approach. Can I reason through? Can I explain?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a useful one. The real reason I believe them is probably that I've thought experiences and had experiences that have led me to kind of believe, and then through them and in addition to them, I've kind of I've kind of arrived at the reasonable conclusions and logic, but so we can kind of take them both ways, but and so what exactly, so you asked, what is it that I believe?
Let's talk about the experiences then, because like
Yeah.
that is the part that I lack. I keep sharing this with people, but like I'm not a
Yeah.
very experiential person. So I'm always curious to hear about like what kind of experiences you have that will, solidify your faith.
It's mostly prayer, and there's kind of both, like every prayer feels like kind of special and meaningful, but then like also certain prayers, or just kind of moments of real need
Mm-hmm.
where I ask God for help and I feel like he answers me. So maybe the earliest, and I kind of kept a journal as a kid. The earliest I remember writing down was when my grandfather died. I was 12 or 13. He and I were kind of close because I was doing some babysitting for him. That doesn't feel like the right word all of a sudden, but he was in decline, and at times I would help him with his medicine and keep an eye on him. So we had a relationship. He dies. I go to the funeral. It's emotional for all the reasons funerals are.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of after the graveside service, I go home, go to bed, and I wake up the next morning, and it's still kind of gnawing at me, this kind of realization that he's gone, and what does this mean? And I guess I wasn't quite at peace with it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I had a spot in my house next to a heater, because it was kind of cold, in Utah in the winters. So there's like this chair next to a heater, and I was kind of keeping warm there in the morning. And just thinking about kind of how I felt uneasy about this, wondering kind of where, is this? Yeah, I think I had the same questions you're kind of asking me. Like, is this for real? Basically, like he's gone. And prayed, because that felt like the only kind of reasonable thing to do. Like, who else is going to resolve this for me? And kind of asked God, like, are you really there? Is Grandpa okay? And I just felt good, in a way that, not just physically good, but like both mentally, emotionally, and kind of a concert of ways that felt beyond my own. But I just felt like really at peace, and something like, yeah, like this assurance, as if somebody told me, like, yeah, he's going to be fine. Or but I didn't, I didn't hear anything. But I felt the same outcome as that. And I felt a lot of love, which somewhat here, but in also future experiences, changes me. And that's maybe the most exciting part of all this, is that I experience this kind of love from nowhere, and it makes me want to be different. And it not even just like makes me want to be different, it just kind of makes me different. And that's, I think, maybe like I said, most exciting part.
I was watching a podcast the other day and I shared the story before, but I love that story. I was watching a podcast the other day with a Father Carlos, which was an atheist for a long time. I think not as long as me, just the way he tells the story. But he claims that today he is an exorcist for the Vatican. So he went from atheist to quite the journey, right? Just and he tells the story of how that changed for him, and he tells. So the first part of the story, and maybe I'll distill it, go and tell the whole story today, because and I definitely recommend you looking up like Father Carlos Martins on YouTube. But he tells this story that there was this group of people in his university that seemed to always be a complete peace. And man, especially with what I told you about, like being a startup founder and looking at Discord every 5 minutes and etc. Like how I wish this in my life. And
Yeah.
but like I said, this group of guys seem to be like a complete peace. And one day I was gonna, was there, wanted to chat with one of them, and I was chatting with one of them, and then somebody came to tell him that somebody hit his car, and his car was completely destroyed. And he barely, it is something that almost any of us would freak out about and go immediately and see, is everything okay, and go try to see who did this, and this guy barely moved, and essentially his response of, yeah, I guess God did not want me to have the car. It's something like in complete peace.
Yeah.
And I said that intrigued me, because I started thinking like I want this in my life. And one day he claims that he was in in a retreat with this group. So he started getting closer to this group and going with them. Said, I didn't believe in God, but I decided to go into the retreat with them. And they're all praying, and we would all pray for an hour in front of the Holy Eucharist, which is something the Catholics do. And every hour, and the idea of the retreat is that you do this nonstop for 3 days. So every hour you change the person who's there. And he said, like, I started praying and asking God, if you're real, and show me yourself. And he reports something very close to you, to what you just did. I mean, there's this feeling of peace and etc. And then, but then the part that gets into my head is that he says, I didn't have any experience. I didn't hear voices. I didn't have like any mystical experiences. I didn't like feel anything like that. And like, it was really just something that reassured me, and like hard to explain, but it seems to be a similar thing that you're describing. And now he says, I felt angry at first because I wanted to have this experience, but later I came to realize how important that was, because me being me, and that's the part that I share with him. Like, me being me, if I had like a experience and like God show up in front of me 3 days later, 4 days later, however much, as I start rationalizing this, I would have thought, I just had a hallucination, and the whole thing that was more powerful at the moment will be less powerful over time. And in a sense, the lack of the experience makes it, for him and for me, just more powerful over time, because you don't have there's nothing that you can question and say, you know what, it was just my mind playing tricks on me. There isn't. It's just, there's nothing there. You didn't see a vision. You didn't hear voices. It's just something that you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but also in some ways very simple, because that's kind of just how it is. There's not many more words you could use. Yeah.
Why do you think then that? Because look, we have 135 people live now. Although I don't think this is concurrent viewers, so you get those numbers from both Twitter and YouTube, and I think Twitter games them a little bit. That's what everybody's concluding. But be it as it may, we have a good number of people in the audience today. Some of them are atheists, because I have a lot of people who are still atheists that watch my podcast, which are great. I love it. And I suppose that if all of them would ask themselves the same question, right?
Yeah.
And go and try the same thing, go pray and see if God talks to me, most of them would not have this experience, right? So how do you think that works? Is it like, why is it that you pray it and you have this feeling that everything is at peace, and most people don't?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I cited one example just because there's like a dozen others that I have the kind of no response experience. So I think the no response is probably the most common scenario. I certainly I think early on in prayer, and I was a missionary in Cleveland, and so every day I would meet with random new people, and we would talk about God, and eventually they'd be kind of like, they'd ask the same questions, so how do you know this? And I would just tell them you just have to kind of pray, and we would pray, and sometimes we had interesting experiences, sometimes we didn't. What's neat about this idea of kind of faith in a God, particularly in the God of Israel, if we to use one definition, is that there's this trust. Jesus said that even you, a wicked father, would give good gifts to your kids. Even imagine how a wonderful heavenly father would give good gifts. James says that if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, and God will give liberally to him that trust him, or something like that. So I think there is this element of like trusting that God will actually answer you because you believe he's that kind of person. Seems to be an important element of it. And then, and I think that comes with a degree of sincerity. So the people I worked with on my mission, Some of them were like skeptics, and I don't think God feels like he needs to answer those prayers. I think he's quite fine.
Who are you talking about? You're talking about people you're talking to, not your peers, your Mormon peers, I presume.
No, yes. So I'm meeting with random people in
Yeah.
Cleveland, and some of them were like, I don't really believe you, but yeah, let's do this prayer thing, and then they kind of come out like, nothing, and I'm like, yeah, you got what you asked for, kind of thing. And others who are like really in a difficult point, and they're like, I need God, I want him, I don't know how to find him, what do I do? And we kind of explain, and sometimes they have special experiences, sometimes they don't. It's not for me to kind of explain how God works, but I think it's a really exciting life journey I've personally found to try and figure out how God works.
Did you ever feel the need to rationalize any of that, or is it enough for you? Like just the idea?
No,
that, hey,
no, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I fear we kind of maybe I've left the atheist on the line thinking, so this guy has like warm fuzzies.
No, but we'll do the full circle. We'll get there.
But yeah, I think every day I think, I like to think of myself as a scrutinizing person, and I think why does the rest of the world feel differently about this? And so I've gone through the narrative over and over, and I keep ending up in the same place.
But is there anything that almost led you astray, so to speak? Because let's think of it like Steel Manning, right? Because it is. I hate when people are asked things like, what would it take to change your mind, and what is the best argument for the other group? And then people just say, nothing could change my mind. Like the other group has no good argument. So like it's kind of unfruitful discussion, right? So there has to be something about atheism that you at some point thought, you know what, that's a good point.
Yeah. So I there was a time when I think I was wrestled more with like the materialism argument, where I was like, I love science. Like that was kind of my favorite subject growing up. I wanted to be an astronaut, and so I struggled kind of reconciling like my beliefs with the apparent contradiction that seems to exist in the scientific community. I'm well beyond that now. I mean, in fact, when I talk to folks who want to engage on that topic, I'm fine to do so, but I'm like, it's not all that interesting actually anymore. I think if heaven went quiet, that would be hard for me. That would be something that would test my patience, certainly.
What do you mean by having going quiet? Like,
like if my prayers became less meaningful. Yeah. I think many struggle with injustice, and I'm not there at the moment, but I don't rule out the scenario that tragedy happens in my life and I feel deeply hurt, and because I've seen people go through this where they're like, I just can't. They harbor a lot of resentment, maybe towards heaven, and I can imagine that happening. Am I answering your question here, Robert?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of atheism is really just resentment towards?
No, I don't think. I think actually it's mostly indifference. But I think actually resentment starts with belief, and then tragedy, and then you kind of are like, maybe I was wrong to put trust here. Yeah. Because trust was breached.
Yeah. I do think that it's hard to talk about most, but I do think that some atheists, and speaking as a former atheist, I don't think it was my case, or I hope not. But I do think that, some atheism happens because like people, it's not that they don't believe in God, it's that they dislike God. And you see this in some arguments that people use. I mean, if you pay attention, when people say, I don't think God exists, but even if he does, he's an asshole, right? Just because then, like, if God does exist, why this, and that, and then
Yeah.
when you unearth it and you shake it a little bit, of course, this is always delicate because it's people and with all our complexities and psychological issues, but you kind of sense that for a lot of people, there is this idea of like the world just isn't the way I like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and look, man, I'll be honest with you. And what I try to do in the podcast here. I don't think the world is the way I like.
And
And
that to me is actually kind of a faith promoting
yeah,
idea, because I think if materialism holds true, why would we care, or why would we
yeah,
expect anything different? But the fact that we have this expectation, one that like
hmm
we can't seem to let go of,
hmm
um, I think is congruent with the idea that there's a part of us who expects
yeah. Well, I
justice.
think what atheists would say, it's not about what you expect, what you don't expect. The world, in fact, is exactly what you would expect from a atheist point of view, which is like this random collection of stuff, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and etc. But like, so if God exists, then has a dark sense of humor. That's what people would say. But I actually think I like the world. Again, let's just go. But I think I like in some senses, I like the universe less now that I'm a believer than before.
Mm,
In a sense that, again, it's hard to explain, right? Because and the funny thing is that, look, but I still believe, and this is because I came through this belief completely rationally, as I shared
yeah,
with you and many times already in this podcast. But for me, it was this rational experience of at looking at things and concluding that this is real after 2 decades of looking at some of the same things and concluding the opposite. But yeah, in some senses, you kind of think that, yeah, like then. But then, why am I this way? Why am I not a little bit better? Why didn't God make me a little bit smarter? Why wasn't I given this gift or this other gift, and etc. So it's hard to reconcile that sometimes. It doesn't seem to be something that bugs you. So, but it is something that sometimes bugs me. Just
yeah, yeah. It one of the so maybe exploring what good means, I think, is a helpful place
yeah.
to not start, but continue perhaps. And because I think that's the more I've wrestled with these topics, I keep coming back to the definition of good, because and because I think if you accept that there is good and evil, and some people I think struggle with accepting that there's evil,
Evil.
that
Yeah.
feels spiritual, that feels supernatural, but good. I think a lot of people can accept that there's good, and I bet if we
hmm
probed on bad, at least folks would concede that, like, you know, war, atrocities, these are bad, and we could go on, but and so if we accept that there is these good things and bad things, then and you put them on kind of a spectrum, to me, God is just the thing that's most good, and and you could just say God is good, and then you were kind of arriving at a definition, and so when I say I believe in God, maybe I'm just saying I believe in some ultimate goodness. I wanted to tie that back to something you were just saying, which was, oh, this, or maybe you can remind me. You were talking about. Um, Maybe I won't be able to tie it back in, but
Yeah. I was about how I view this thing about like some people are really just angry at God and not really
yeah,
disbelieving that
yeah.
He's good.
So, well. Anyway, if we then, well, so then I think if you start exploring kind of what are the fundamental tenets of this goodness, um, one of
hmm
them that I think is really interesting is this idea of being subordinate. I think that's actually where I was going to go,
Yeah.
to goodness. Like you said, sometimes you wish you were something, like if God really loved you, or if God was different, he might have created this scenario differently. But one of the apparent tenets of goodness, because Jesus came into this world supposedly to demonstrate this, was subordinate to the ultimate goodness. And Jesus kind of accepted his fate, it seems. He did the will of the Father 100% of the time, demonstrating for us what goodness is all about. And so as I kind of reflected, I was like, John said that a man, something about the best good is a man lay down his life for his friends, which ultimately Jesus did. And, that's clearly pointing to him. And it's hard to, I find it hard to argue with that like, if somebody sacrificed everything they had for the good of another, that feels pretty noble to me. It feels kind of like amazing. And
hard, because look, man, and hard, because that gives you pause, right? All that you're giving up. And then you think about all the people who didn't really have the opportunities that you had in the first place. And like, to which extent, this is something that I struggle with constantly, because like, you look at this idea of like being lowly, and like Jesus came as a carpenter, right? Just and not as a
barn,
not as a scholar, but like would you be a carpenter and leave your job in VC? No, I would not cease to be a founder too. But then when you think about it, like, if we were all carpenters, right, then none of us were scholars, and like, we wouldn't have had Thomas Aquinas, we wouldn't have had the churches that we had throughout Europe, and we wouldn't have had the civilization that we had. So it seems I was thinking about that yesterday, the whole day, by the way. Just it seems important that we tackle hard problems. It seems important that we tackle reason. It seems important that we nurture our intelligence, but at the same time, we must be ready to give it up. So if you've done something very noble at the age of 10 that precluded the career that you had, that precluded the education that you had, you wouldn't even understand that what you gave up was important. And this is the fundamental tension that I see. This, this idea that you need your intellect to, in a lot of ways, to understand all of that. But what you're really being asked for is to be willing to let that go. Right? Isn't that a little bit paradoxical?
Yeah. There's a lot of beautiful paradoxes in kind of religious teaching, specifically the Christian sphere, that I just relish. And I think one of the you've mentioned the Book of Mormon, and we've used the word Mormon a couple times. I think one of your guests kind of explained what that's all about. But there's
let's not assume everybody watches all the episodes. I wish.
Well, I'll just say that there's this book called the Book of Mormon. It's it's actually an interesting, related to the Bible. So the Bible took place mostly in Jerusalem and the surrounding area. The Book of Mormon took place mostly in the Americas, but it's a group of people who left Jerusalem and kind of traveled to the Americas. So they maintain the law of Moses, but they actually do it in a way that where they understand that Christ is coming, actually. So they're pre-Christian Jews that with an eye towards Christ, which is kind of unique. There's other aspects that are unique, but I mention it just because there's a description that's fairly popular in the Book of Mormon about this good, test of goodness. One of the prophets says that you should experiment upon the word of God, he says, and you should plant a seed in your heart, which maybe I take to like reading or praying. And he says, if that seed, how do you know if it's a good seed or a bad seed? How do you know if you've planted a rock or a dead seed versus one that has vitality, I guess is his question. And he said, if that seed starts to grow, like if you nurture it and it starts to swell within you, then it's a good seed. And he's like, and if you continue to nurture it and it grows and it bears fruit, then certainly, and the fruit is good, then it's hard to argue at this point. You've kind of proven the fact, which is kind of neat that he uses scientific kind of terminology. Like it's hard to argue with his reason. But at the same time, I can apply that kind of approach in what feels like a spiritual realm. And so some of these teachings, like the one we discussed, where it's noble to kind of give up some things on behalf of another, feel like, if you plant those in your heart and maybe you live them a little bit, they come back to me, and I feel a swelling within my own heart that says, hey, this is a good seed. This is a good thing. Do more of this.
Mhm.
And in that sense, I feel like you can take a rational, even approach to following goodness.
Yeah. I came to believe that paradoxes are, because atheists love to point at contradictions that come from
Yeah.
the Christian life or religious life in general. And I think that a paradox and a contradiction are different things. I hope this is clear to everybody, but like a contradiction is not a paradox. Otherwise, they would be the same word. So paradox is a different thing. But I like to think that paradoxes are very important for our understanding of God, because a lot of people leave the cultural aspects of their faith by quoting like pieces of scripture and then say this is what Jesus would have done, and we Christians need to do this thing because look, the Bible says this passage or that passage. And but then you look at other passage and there is something that points to other thing being the right way. And I have an example of that, but like how welcoming we should be to how peaceful we should be as Christians, and tolerant and give the other cheek. But there are passages on the Bible that give you the other interpretation, right? And those things look like paradoxes. And I was thinking about it the other day, and I went into this mode of thinking in which the best analogy that I could come up with is if you have a pyramid that's a three-dimensional object, and then you try to project this into two dimensions, it can be a square or it can be a triangle, and you can see somebody affirming it is a triangle, and they're right, but then you see somebody else affirming it is a square, and they're also right. And again, this is not a contradiction, but it's an apparent. If you can prove that both of them
Yep.
are true, it is a paradox, because how those two things can be true at the same time. But we have to believe, I guess, that God lives and operates in an environment and a dimension, in a realm, however you want to call it, that is very different and bigger than ours, that our mind cannot fully comprehend it. So those things that are apparently paradoxical are exactly the things that we need to wrestle with. And look, they are both true at the same time. And this is why Jesus wasn't a letter. Jesus was a person, because a person is the only thing that we know of that can deal with those paradoxes. Like only you as a person can look at the situation and say, yeah, like I have to be generous, but I also have to be protective. And I will decide in this situation how to act. Right? But the letter says be generous and be protective. If you put it in a real situation, it may lead you to a paradox. But as a person, you can make sense of it.
Yeah, I've enjoyed maybe this isn't exactly what you're referring to, but he says, Jesus does, that if you seek, don't seek after riches and all, or the worldly things. Seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these other things will be added to you. And I don't think he's talking about riches. I think he was talking about clothing and necessities,
Yeah.
but which is a bit of a paradox. And I think his
Yeah.
teachings are generally that way. He says, don't seek for your own well-being, seek for others, and then you're going to find your own well-being. There's this,
But that means that your well-being is also important, right? You're gonna.
yeah. So that it's a paradox is one word for that particular teaching. It's serendipity is another, where you go looking for A, you want A, but you go looking for B and you find A, and which is kind of odd and unusual, but I think is actually how life ends up working. You know, seeking for yourself and your own personal happiness primarily is a fool's errand. It's a dead end. And it turns out that seeking for other people's happiness and well-being is extremely rewarding, and ends up being the best way to find your own.
And the paradox of that is that if you go seek for other people's well-being because this is the best way to reach our well-being, that doesn't count, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Just
There's
they
amount
really,
of sincerity for it to actually work. Yeah.
yeah. And which is what makes this all so hard, because when you're trying to convince someone of this, like you can say that and people can acknowledge that, and which ties to something that I was talking about yesterday on Twitter. But like if I'm telling this to you and you don't believe any of that, and then and you go seek other people's well-being because this is the best way to get your well-being, like you really haven't stopped seeking for your well-being.
Right.
And the thing that I was alluding to was this idea of cultural Christianity, and that some people subscribe to. I think recently came back on the news because of Richard Dawkins, to the best of my knowledge, using the term and saying like I see myself as a cultural Christian. But look, I when I struggle with this, 10 years ago or something like that, in which I looked around to say, hey, you know what, that there are many things that the Christian society created that it's good, and you know, maybe they should be preserved. But the conclusion I got at the time is that no, they shouldn't. I mean, just if this is a lie, right? If we built this civilization on a lie, if we built this whole thing on a lie, let it burn. Who cares? Or just and I guess the way this connects to that is like it wouldn't work to begin with. I mean, if you're trying to preserve any form of like cultural Christianity for the appearances of that, at best it dies. It doesn't work. It just right. What does that mean? It turns anti-Christian very easily, because now you have a lot of people fake looking for the well-being of others, so that they, you know, it's virtue signaling to some extent, if you want to use modern terminology, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like you have to look much further to imagine what that looks like than just kind of all around you. Uh, maybe to kind of harken back to the earlier conversation on like, you know, why do you believe or this or that? One thing that I found striking is that we have a lot of acceptance in society today for abstract ideals, that are counter materialism. You know, we believe that men are created equal and have certain inalienable rights.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fair to ask why. You know, I'm quoting from a set of words that said because God said so. But if you don't accept that God said that, then why? Why do you believe that people have these like special things called rights? You know, I guess we don't give animals these rights, and certainly plants don't get them, and definitely like inorganic matter does not get them. But I think most of society today accepts that humans are special.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we fill like a whole kind of shelf in the animal kingdom to ourselves, and I think that's because of a Christian heritage that, or I shouldn't say Christian, kind of a maybe Israelite, or I'm trying to think of the broadest term, but a bit, you know, Abrahamic would kind of encompass, you know, most of the religious populace.
Well, wouldn't humans be special because we're humans and we're the ones thinking about it?
Yeah, right. Those who think they're special are special.
Yeah.
If you're incapable of special thinking.
Yeah.
But I actually want to challenge, because I thought about this some, like intelligence I don't think is alone. Like the materialists might say that intelligence is what gives us value. But you can imagine
We're about to find out, eh?
right. You can imagine an artificial intelligence. Would we ascribe value to that, or the counter to a child, or a person with lower mental capacity, impaired mental capacity? Should they be given less value? And I think the answer to that is no. I think society would agree that they have equal human value. So it's not. So I think if you were to chase in the intelligence theory, you fall short. There's just something about being human. And maybe to pursue that AI one, just because we're trying to get clicks and visits or something. If AI were to cause a car accident, do we or to kill somebody, maybe is the better approach, start a war, would we hold the AI accountable? I kind of think we would hold the creator of the AI accountable. Like ultimately, we feel like the people are the moral agents, and maybe moral agency is actually where value accrues, and not intelligence.
We mentioned AI, so this podcast is now worth $20 billion.
That's right.
Yeah.
It used to be worth 30, but we're kind of in a small AI recession.
Exactly. I don't know if I believe that everybody would agree with you that humans are special. And this, I think this goes back to the paradox thing, because it does happen that a lot of people just, again, our heritage is also very rule based, right?
Yep.
And like, so there's a lot of those circumstances in which somebody for something to be true in our view, it has to be described in words. And once you describe in words, you can then just go and apply those words as is to situations, so you end up with those problems in which there are a lot of people who believe that those rights that you have should be, you're right, we don't, but they should be extended to animals, to this, to that, because the letter of the law says this, right? Or because we have consciousness, or because we have intelligence. One of the first things that happened, if you remember, in the AI craze, was when that Google engineer started to try to find a way to prove that AI had consciousness, which sounded ridiculous after we saw ChatGPT. But like whatever version of AI Google had in fact consciousness, and tried to hire a lawyer to ascribe rights to that conscious entity. So my fear, in fact, is that without the human connection, and without this immaterial, almost soul-like thing that breathes meaning from the personal experiences that we have, we fall into this very legalistic world, in which the letters say so, and then right, just go apply the raw naked principle, because that's the way to decide, and that kind of forces you to apply rights to whatever bunch of other things. Again, I was also a vegetarian for 6 years, and I was not a vegan because veganism wasn't a thing back then. I would definitely be a vegan if veganism was a thing back then, because my reasonings were all moral. And that's exactly because of this. I mean, I'm not claiming that vegans are worse or better, and I know many vegans that are fantastic people. But I'm going to talk about me, and if it's applicable to you, it is. If not, it isn't. But looking back, obviously, I didn't see it back like that back then. But like looking back, when you don't have God to provide you with morals, you keep looking for places from which you can derive this idea that I'm a moral person, right?
Yep.
So for me, it was the whole reason for me being a vegan was like I need to use this as a way to provide that I'm a moral person. So like, look, if an animal is suffering is bad. That's where I derive my morals from. So I have to go and apply this and say, like, animals shouldn't ever suffer. Which again is very different than a personal interpretation of animals shouldn't suffer, but there are other things that matter, and as a person I can put them together and decide on a case-by-case basis. But no, I have to get this principle, and make this principle the source of my morality, and then go from there. So I think a lot of people that use that would actually do the other way around and just say, hey, all of those animals, all of those rights, all of those things should be ascribed to animals or inanimate things like AIs.
Yeah, and I think the sentiment I would agree with. I think life is noble. I think most of those people would think that life is more valuable than inorganic matter, rocks and stuff. And I think life does feel more special than other things. I think I would feel like that logic would be hard to take to its ultimate end, though. Like, we don't really eat human flesh out of respect for kind of what we see as the sanctity of human life.
Well, I kind of do, but that's fine.
Yeah,
Just,
well, we don't. Yeah, but we feel kind of hate to eat something.
Yeah,
we have to
yeah.
eat some kind of living matter. And I think maybe it's not worth debating this further, because I think you and I are maybe on the same page. But
yeah, for me, it was you didn't get that, but it was mostly a joke on the fact that like Catholics believe in the real presence of
that's
Jesus
right.
Christ
Yes,
in the
that's
Eucharist,
right.
so
Yeah,
I do eat
yeah.
real flesh. But they're just
That's right. Just super holy flesh. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe some of these arguments are in part to start from common ground, because I think that's not often a tack that's taken. But I actually think atheists and myself, I feel like I often wonder or expect that a lot of my intelligent peers would actually agree with me on a lot of things morally.
Yeah.
And maybe that we can kind of deduce from those morals to arrive at something that looks strangely Judeo-Christian eventually, but maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist.
Well,
but,
if I could go a minute more on that, Glauber, I think one of the things that holds people back from embracing, they're like, okay, I like the ideals of Christianity, like the morals, those are good. But I think where people resist are like the mythology. They're like, but Noah and the ark and like the Garden of Eden, creationism, can we just like, that's got all this baggage. I don't want to buy into it. Can I just have...
my camp. That was my camp.
Yeah, that was, but they're like, but treating other people, golden rule, sign me up. I'm trying to think of other things that would kind of fall in that camp, but maybe human sanctity of life, sure. But I'm sensitive. I can see that perspective. Like when I'm in a conversation with an atheist, I'm like, oh, let's go bring up, some baggage. But what I've come to recently is that some of these things have real symbolic depth, that if you set aside the materialism, science, creationism debate, and like the miracles versus like materialism debate, which I think are kind of the two. I think creationism and miracles are kind of the two touch points that people struggle with. But if you set those aside for a moment and just looked at like the symbolic value of the Eden story and other scripture stories, I think there's just like an infinitely deep well of meaning there. And as I said to you, I've kind of come to terms with like the materialism debate that doesn't struggle anymore. And I've just embraced this whole world of symbolic depth that is like so fulfilling. And I wonder if others would actually enjoy it more than they realize. But
one of the mistakes that I think some people make, I definitely made it at some point, is whenever you find the symbolism, you take it as proof that it didn't happen. You see what I mean? Because then once you find such neat symbolism and
it feels like a constructed narrative.
It feels like
a historical
narrative to convey the symbolism instead of and look, real story is that they are messier, right? And they don't fit as neatly, and things don't fall into places in such a ranged manner. So I think I had a phase in which I saw the symbols of it as good things, and for me this was kind of a piece of evidence that it wasn't true.
Yeah, so I can see that. I mean, it's funny because the Bible,
and I wouldn't have a problem. I guess, with something that is telling you it's fake. Like I don't have a problem with symbolism in the Lord of the Rings because I know like it's never meant to be true. But the stories of the Bible are not like that. They're supposed to be true, but they also carry the symbol. So I think that what a lot of people do is that they look at those stories, and the moment you find such well constructed symbolism, it is actually taken as evidence that this is not true. But because the truth claim of this sits at the foundation, you kind of destroy the foundation.
So let's talk about that, because I
Yeah.
think historicity
Yeah.
is well and good, but I just don't know that that's like the end all.
Yeah.
I mean, is like one of your shows talked about the brother Karamazov recently,
Karamazov,
and
yeah.
you know, is that true? It's not, right? Nobody purports it to be true, and yet there's a well of meaning there. There's like truth within it. You know, story is not historically accurate, but the it's almost there's an argument to be made that there's more truth to it than in some random journal you find, because the random journal is just going to state some facts that don't really string together anything meaningful, whereas the brother Karamazov arrives at like really powerful truths that may not be able to communicate in other ways. And so like historical fact, fundamental to truth. You know, if you had to like, I guess the historicity of the Bible is not the most interesting thing to me. That's not what I go to the Bible for. I guess I go to it because I think it's a vehicle for these fundamental truths that I can't find anywhere else.
If you were to find, if somebody would come to you and demonstrate that one of those stories, that what's your favorite story in the Bible? Let's just go there first.
It have to be a New Testament story, maybe one of the miracles. Yeah.
Let's get one from the OT, just because it's easier to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Jonah and the whale was one that was top of mind recently.
Yeah, and it's funny because I mean I'm happy to share my perspective on that, but I don't think that story is true at all. Like I don't think it happened in a sense. I think that you know but the Exodus was something that supposedly happened.
Yeah, I mean I think that's they were in Egypt and then they were in
if somebody proved to you that absolutely didn't happen, and let's say you accept, because there's also like things are changing all the time. So another mistake is that there is one piece of evidence and then you look at that evidence and say, see, right? Yeah. But look, things are complicated. We've been finding evidence pro and against things for 2,000 years. And, you know, just 2,000, like 100 years ago, everybody thought that the universe was infinite. Now we have very good evidence that it is not. It came to be at a point in time, right? So just that those things can change. But like if you came to believe that like the Exodus story was false, like historically demonstrably false, would anything change for you?
I mean, I'm tempted to say no, but it certainly would beg a lot of questions. Yeah. Because, you know, I agree with you, Jonah and the whale. That's, I think if God's like, oh, actually, that one's not true, we'd all be like, yeah, we never really believed it.
Well, some people, I'm sure some people do, but I don't.
Yeah, some do. Yeah, I shouldn't be so dismissive, but some would probably say, oh, maybe you were just trying to convey this like 3 days in the whale was kind of like 3 days in the tomb, and you've embedded a Christian narrative in the Old Testament that no one discovered till later. You know, that sounds interesting to me, but if the Exodus story is demonstrably false, yeah, I mean, I don't feel like it takes away from the fundamental truths that I've discovered that were communicated along the way of the Exodus story. But then, yes, I think it would beg a lot of questions. Like, okay, so like, are the Israelites like, you know, what's with the rest of the story? Because that feels like a pretty critical part.
Yeah. Now, if the New Testament was proven to be false, that would be, I wouldn't be a Christian anymore. Because again, this is how I came to it. Right? So if you imagine, like I'm an atheist, and then I look at this, and then I see this as a historical document, not the Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
But again, the Book of Revelation never tries to be a historical document,
No.
and that's the right. You look at the
Starts out
gospel
with, I
account.
saw a vision, and this is what it was.
Exactly right. You take it's not even my favorite gospel, but you look at the Gospel of Luke. The introduction is the diametrical opposite of the Book of Revelation. It's like, hey, here are the facts that I could gather, and right. So it is a historical document, and it's not a historical document in the way that we would write a historical document today, but it is a historical document that is on the same level of other historical documents from the first century, right? So like you get like how history was written in the first century. That's very close to how Luke writes the gospel, right? So it is a historical document, which means that it probably makes, like, it gives itself the same liberties that other historical documents from the time would give themselves, but still a historical document. That is designed to convey that story, because I kind of feel like, and this is like where I think it's an interesting discussion, at least for me. If you take this away, why not just, atheism, in which, everybody understands, everybody agrees that psychology is important. So you have those symbols that talk to you on a psychological level. How can you tell the difference? Like, why not just like a mental model in which everything is random, but you have those symbol, the need for symbolism that is embedded into you by evolution. And those stories help you cope with that.
Maybe we've kind of misunderstood what I see the purpose of the symbolism is.
Yeah.
Because I think you're right that reading the Da Vinci Code or watching American Treasure, you get kind of excited. There's like, oh, there's symbols and connecting dots, and it all leads to something.
Yeah.
And then you kind of finish the movie and the book, and you're kind of not sure where it led you, but it was a fun ride.
But there are books that are very deeply symbolic,
Yes.
like Brothers Karamazov or The Lord of the Rings. I'm trying to watch The Lord of the Rings with my kids. He's 5 now, and it still doesn't understand a lot, of course. But like there's a lot of symbolism in The Lord of the Rings, right? Just it can touch you forever in a way that.
But I think one of the things that they're pointing to and suggesting is that are some fundamental truths that, like, God exists. He is full of love, like to a level that is hard to comprehend, and that his son demonstrated this like subordinate, loyal, honorific role that we should emulate. And I think that kind of behooves us to live life differently. And so I actually, maybe to turn the table some, Glauber, you say, I don't really, it's more of a rational thing for me than like a spiritual one. Do you feel behooved? Do you feel compelled to live your life differently and even live it more painfully? Because I think that's maybe something we don't fully acknowledge. That Job
people ask
Christ,
me,
Christ was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and it's not a pleasant initially way to go. It's a very inconvenient.
It is.
Like Jesus asked us to actually take his yoke, which presumably is a burden, and ultimately it's a better burden than the one we would otherwise inherit. But it is a burden. And so do you feel compelled? Does your ration alone, is it sufficient to compel you to bear that burden?
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
And in fact, going back to, like, somebody asked me the other day, like, and I guess, Alexandre, if you're listening today, this person was, one of our users at Urso and watching the podcast, and was I think is in this journey as well of like, look, I'm coming to terms with this, and the podcast is helping, which I love to hear that, because at the end of the day, I mean, this is why part of the reason why I decided to do it. And one of the things that he asked me is how my life got better after this. And I said, it kind of didn't, man. In a lot of ways, it got worse. And one of them, I touched on it. Like, I have a lot more existential angst today than I had before. In the sense that, look, I guess one of the ways to explain, not perfect, conveying those things is always hard, but the stakes are much higher now, right? Versus like, yeah, I'm gonna die and disappear and whatever, right? There's so much more at stake, and one of the things that I remember that I told my wife after, like, I was reading, I don't even remember what it was. It might have been the Gospel of John, which is my favorite gospel.
That's the right one.
In which I told my wife, look, if this is real, if this has really happened, right? Because for me, this is very important. As I said, if this is not real, like, then whatever, I'll just go party tomorrow and I'll go do whatever. But if this really happened, like, you have to stop and understand that there are consequences to your, like, you can't just be indifferent. You can't just get and say, hey, like, God came to earth, like, the universe was created by someone, which modern science would agree with that, which is again so funny, because in 1950s it wasn't the case, but like the Big Bang Theory, which today sometimes those roles are inverted. The Big Bang Theory at the time was bashed by being something religious, like, which, this can't be true, because it would give the religious people a lot of ammunition. And today it's the other way around. But it's just today something like, are you anti? Because a lot of Christians, unfortunately, today believe that the Big Bang is not real, because the universe is supposed to be like 6,000 years old. So this can't be real, right? So
Irony.
But at the time, it was a completely different story. But look, if the universe was created by someone, and this person came here in person and told us a couple of things, oh boy, we better listen. Right? Because and I think I never had the transformational moment in which, like, that would come from an experience. But my life today is completely different than it was 5 years ago. But it all comes from putting a bunch of those things together and, like, hey, look, I mean, just there are consequences to this belief. You can't just believe in something.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
And otherwise you don't truly believe. Do you truly believe? Like, could I claim that I truly believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead if I don't change my life? I can't really. I just it's weird. So yeah, it happened, and then, like, in the same way that, like, if you look at a historical event, you see that the Japanese market crashed, and although it's back today again, but the Japanese market crash, and you believe that happened, and this is relevant to your life, because maybe it's not relevant to your life, that's fine, but like, Jesus is relevant for what the stuff Jesus is talking about is relevant for everybody, right? And then there's, let's say you have a very, very big position in the Japanese yen or whatever. If you believe that happened, are you not going to act on it? I mean, then that means you don't believe that happened, right? Just believe kind of has to lead to action.
After the resurrection, well, yeah. So the apostles are like surprised and excited, but I don't think they know what this means, and they just go back to fishing. And then Jesus comes and sees them. Is he on the water again? And that's maybe how they identify him. I forget, but they have a meal after they've been fishing, which is kind of amazing, right? Because he's resurrected, so he can actually eat things, which is another kind of cool anecdote. But he asks Peter, "Lovest thou me? Maybe more than these," referring to the fish. And Peter's like, "Yes, of course." And then he asks him again, lovest thou these more than these? And he's like, yea, Lord, thou knowest I love thee. And then he asks him a third time, and Peter maybe is getting either frustrated or humiliated. And he's like, what do you want me to say? Of course, I love you. And he says, then feed my sheep. And I think I feel some of that burden, when I talk about like these prayers I have and how they have meaning, is that I think it behooves us to behave differently, and part of that's to help others. And if somebody calls me in distress, I feel like inconvenient to my life, have to drop everything. I can't fish all day to make life more comfortable for myself. I have to do other things now. And maybe to share one more kind of story. There's a book of scripture called, some people call it the book of Enoch.
Yeah.
Which isn't in the Bible, but is kind of apocryphal.
Well, here's the thing about, not to interrupt you,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like, there is this whole discussion that Catholics and Protestants keep having about the Bible and etc. Like the
Right.
book of Enoch is in the Bible of the Ethiopian church.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So you
I don't feel the Bible as Protestants do, like this thing just fell from the sky and this is the Bible. Like the Bible itself is a collection of books that some entity at some point decided, okay, those are the books from Scripture. And some of them were very disputed. The book of Revelation was very disputed, almost didn't make it. And there was another text that was the Shepherd of Hermas that almost made it as well, because a lot of Christians at the time looked upon it, and it was very widely circulated, and almost every church people would be familiar with the Shepherd of Hermas. It is, by the way, the Shepherd of Hermas is where the imagery of the angel and the devil on your shoulders come from. Like they would say that, so it comes from that book, and it's still in our culture, but it's not part of the Bible. But this all happened in the context of the Roman Empire, having those discussions with Constantine and the bishops. But if you go look at the Ethiopian church, they consider the book of Enoch a part of Scripture.
So to kind of riff on that a bit, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the first prophet of the restored church is Joseph Smith. Mm-hmm. He's the one who translated the Book of Mormon. He also received by revelation, effectively, the Book of Enoch. It's called the Book of Moses in our scriptures, but it kind of has some similarities with perhaps this Ethiopian one I'm not familiar with, but the more common Book of Enoch. But in it, it describes this vision Enoch has, and Enoch sees, he's kind of speaking with God, and God shows him a vision of the world and all the terrible things that are going to happen. And in it, they see kind of wars, people fighting each other. Enoch thinks it's terrible, and he looks at God, and God is weeping. And Enoch says, how is it that thou canst weep? Like, you created everything. You're all powerful. And he goes on to describe all the marvelous things God is. And God says, I created these my creations. They hate their own blood. Like these are my children, and they're killing each other. And he openly weeps. An interesting, actually, parallel. So the Enoch story kind of attributes those tears to the flood to Noah's flood. So that, most people see Noah's flood as like a vengeful God, but the Book of Enoch describes him as a very just heart-stricken one. Like the flood was caused out of just sheer pain and sadness. But I think it's an interesting depiction of God. It feels like a God more like Christ is, this grief-stricken person who just feels the compassion for everybody around them. And that's the beauty I see, but also the pain that comes with kind of what I see is a life of discipleship, is that once I realize that everyone else is feeling, I guess, pain, and that God is maybe a possible solution, I I don't know. I guess I have to turn outward to help all of them and bear their burdens. You can't effectively help someone unless you get really intimately part of their life,
Yeah.
love them, and kind of go through that pain with them. And then you're just kind of feeling everybody's pain all the time. But I think
That's why people call you.
that's yeah. But I
That's what
think
people call.
that's ultimately what joy is. Like God, this is what God experiences. This is the life He lives. Is one of just deep meaning, and a lot of compassion, but maybe some difficulty,
Yeah.
which I don't think is maybe the common perception of heaven, for example.
Now, this is not to mean that the symbols are not true. Don't get me wrong. What I think and look, this is in fact the best way to describe it, because Jesus Christ is supposed to be like, there is a world of symbols. I think we all agree with that. Like you don't have to be a Christian for that. Platonic is enough, right? Just Plato had this
No,
idea of the world of forms, right? So there is this world of forms and this world of symbols, and to some extent that present in your psyche, and there's this world of matter and or this world of flesh and the world of atoms, or however you want to call it, and Jesus Christ is where those things meet, and the incarnation is where those things meet. So I don't think that, I actually think it's not surprising to me anymore, now that I accept the resurrection, that that this is symbolically very powerful, because this is not one of our human symbols that are coming from the human stories that are distorted. This is the pure symbol of God coming to tell you that story through those symbols. But because of the incarnation, it's telling you the story through a real story.
mm-hmm.
And I think both things are important, and you can't have one without the other, right? Just it's not. I don't think it is Christianity if you remove one of them. Like, so yeah, you have to go into the symbols, but you also have to, like, there's either. So I still defend my stance that, that what got me into this path, which is, look, if this is just a symbol, then let it burn. I don't care. I don't want it.
Yeah. I think you're right, because there certainly is this kind of power with like the New Testament story is very organic, and it just kind of happened. And I think you're right. There's a lot of I believe in the historicity of the New Testament, and the fact that it also interweaves all these like symbols, that is kind of amazing. And I think it lends a degree of enchantment to all of our lives, that like
Yeah.
our lives can similarly be full of meaning, even if they seem very organic. I think God can have a high degree of involvement, even if it
One of
doesn't
the
seem like He
hardest
does.
things, yeah. One of the last things, I'm not going to even say the hardest, but one of the last things that I could accept as true was that the sun darkening, right? Just after Christ dies, like for 3 hours. I initially thought that, yeah, this is just like people after the fact just writing it down to create the symbol of like the day became night and darkness came to. But there is mentions of that in the historical record. And if you go look for it, like there's a historian called Thallus that writes about it. And there are other historians as well that writes about the phenomena. And there isn't in any surviving text like the description, but you see, like, I think people sometimes don't realize that texts that survive, 2,000 years is a long time, and most texts just don't survive. So a lot of what we know about the past is texts that we know mentioning those other texts that we don't
right.
know, but we
Yeah.
but we know that they existed because of the mentions, right? In fact, there is a Christian heresy. There's a famous Christian heresy called Marcionism. This guy that believed that the God of the New Testament was not Christ. So those things are different, and it was considered a heresy. And we know his positions. We know very well about him, but we don't have any of his texts. None of them survive. But you have the church fathers engaging with Marcion, right? So
Yeah.
you can you can reconstruct what was said based on that. So, but like the way I see things today, I mean, even the sun like going dark is a historical fact. I mean, it
Yep.
happened. It's documented, and like what a powerful symbol of the death of the Messiah. That just and it wasn't an eclipse. A lot of people think, oh, it was just an eclipse. No way. Eclipses don't last 3 hours. Right, just the eclipses. We had one in North America the other day. I mean, in 3 minutes, it's done and gone, and it doesn't. It won't. So it's not an eclipse. It's just a mysterious fact that we don't understand. Which is not to say it's not natural. Which is a great segue. You said one thing about the symbols and the other things that you sometimes about miracles. Do you believe you need a supernatural element to talk about God, or can God be completely Spinoza style natural? Like I set the world in motion and no miracles.
Like deterministic would be kind of a no material. So I mean, I believe in miracles.
Mechanical, yeah. You
So-
do believe in miracles, yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I feel like I kind of have to represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and but personally, I kind of subscribe to like a law of least intervention. It seems like God wants to intervene in our lives as little as possible.
As little as possible, yeah.
But so at the beginning, I said that maybe one of the things that defined us as special humans was our moral agency. Was that we have the right to choose. We can make choices, and those choices have consequences. And if God chose for us, then God would get the consequences, right? It was his choice, but he's kind of allowed us to choose, and so we can then inherit the consequences. And if he intervenes too much, then he kind of restricts our ability to make choices, right? I mean, if he told Hitler that he couldn't kill anybody, or if he didn't allow Hitler to kill people, then Hitler couldn't have fully exercised his agency and then inherited whatever Hitler will inherit. It's probably a rule that you should never just like use Hitler in an analogy. It's just like a bad idea. But so maybe
let's try again.
But yeah. But if somebody Mao, no, just kidding. Well, yeah, if you choose,
you're supposed to get better, not worse.
Right. Anyway, but the reverse is true, which is that if somebody leans on God so much, they use their agency to plead for his intervention. In the same way, he might be bound to actually intervene to a degree. Like I have to honor this person's agency, and they have faith in me. So we see the woman with an issue of blood in the New Testament who reaches out and believes, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I can be healed. And Jesus is walking through, and he feels virtue go out of him. It almost wasn't even his choice to heal this woman. It was kind of hers. And so anyway, this is all my way of saying that I think there's it appears to me that there's this law of least intervention where God tries to let us, give honor to the agency he's given us. That's kind of the whole reason for us being here. But part of that is also honoring our desire for his intervention on occasion, which is a miracle. Is what I was
Do you think that this is also why God is so hidden from people? Because one argument that atheists use a lot is, yeah, if God wants us to believe in him, he would make things a lot more explicit. Like God is not explicit. You have to look a lot to find it, right? Could it be, do you view this as something like, yeah, look, if God was on your face, then like you don't have any work to do. You already know, like it's already there. Right?
Yeah, you're asking like, has God created this like as a test for some reason?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a test, but like it might be like
is there some value?
Agree. Yeah, we seem to not being present, because we seem to agree there is a purpose to the universe, right? So is God being hidden necessary for this purpose, or is just like a right?
It I don't know. That's a good question. Um, I mean, some of the thoughts that are even it seems that even workers of evil or darkness acknowledge God's existence on occasion. There's this story in the New Testament where like he casts out devils into like a pig or something and has a conversation with them, and the devils know who he is, and they're like afraid of him. And yet so knowing God or Jesus and who he is not sufficient to become good, I guess. And I'm not directly answering your question, but I'm kind of circling it.
Yeah, no, you're getting there. Yeah.
And so I think there's we're supposed to develop something independent of the knowledge of God's existence. And I wonder if not having him present aids us in developing this other adjacent thing. Whereas having him present kind of would get in the way.
One of the best physical evidences I've ever found for God, and again, this is not how I came to faith, because I already shared that with you. It was a very historical process in which, like, I'm looking at the New Testament. But after that, and this is relatively recent, like in the last 2 years, so to speak, a year and a half, 2 years, I became obsessed, which is what we do, I guess. Sometimes we get obsessed and go
definitely.
super deep in I became obsessed with the Shroud of Turin. And are you familiar with the Shroud of Turin?
No,
Because Kent
no.
wasn't. And I behoove you, to use your word, to go look. And I will send you a particular video that I like, that I sent Kent as well.
I was about to write it down. I'll just wait for your video.
I will send you, like, which is the best for me. It's a 2-part series, like an hour each, but worth every second. That goes into detail and into the Shroud of Turin. But the Shroud of Turin is a relic that is currently again, depends on what you believe, but I believe is legit. But it can trace its history to the 14th century. So in the 14th century, people are aware of it. Before the 14th century, nobody knows about it. There are legends, there are things, and then etc. But in the 14th century, it appears in the historical record, which is obviously why some people think it's fake. In fact, the church at the time thought it was fake. But it is supposed to be the burial cloth of Jesus. And then the idea is that when Jesus resurrected, there was some physical process that imprinted his image in the shroud. And again, I'll show you. I'll send you the documentary. Again, which there are many documentaries. If you go look, there is a lot of stuff on the internet about the Shroud of Turin, but this one is the best I found.
So it's like the Holy Grail or other of these kind of relics of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Holy Grail is a different relic, but this one is like
it's a different one.
Yeah. But they've done one of the things that makes the Shroud of Turin impressive is, again, it is currently one of my favorite stories about Christianity. So I'm happy. I'm glad that you don't know. To some extent, I'm glad that you don't know.
You're glad I asked you about this.
Yeah. But because nobody knows how the image came to be imprinted in the Shroud of Turin, and there's no paint. It's just an image that was generated by almost like lithography.
Okay.
And again, this is something that appears in the 14th century and that is kept in a church. And then the church that was hosting it was on fire, caught fire. And then they had to patch pieces of the shroud. And still there. I mean, the fact that it survived at all is already impressive. Not miraculous, for sure, but impressive. But then in the late 19th century, I don't know if we can share screen on StreamYard. I never tried, so I don't know if it works, but let's do it. Since you don't know, we'll try to do it. The Shroud of Turin is a very faint image. It's essentially a piece of cloth with a shadow of a silhouette of a person. And in the late 19th century, 1890 something, when photography was invented, somebody takes a picture of the Shroud of Turin. Let's see if I can share. Yeah. I think it's going to, oh no, I actually can share my Google search. Somebody takes a picture, right? And this is what you see in the picture, this thing here. The image on the shroud is this one here that you see on the left. So you see there is nothing there. It's very faint, and you can't really see much. You see there's a face there, but when you take a photo negative of that, I mean, and photography did not exist in the 14th century. If it did, I don't know my history well. But when you take a picture of the shroud, in the negative of the picture, you see this image on the right.
Yeah.
So again, I find fascinating, and there is a lot of evidence that this goes back to the 1st century. There is a lot of evidence. There is blood in the shroud that can be tested for, and it's of a particular type. That is the same blood type in all of the alleged miracles that people claim. So there is pollen in the shroud that it's supposedly from that region. So and some of that evidence is weaker, some of that evidence is stronger. But like the belief is that this is the shroud that Jesus was wrapped on when he resurrected. But here's the thing: they carbon dated it, and the carbon date is the one piece of evidence that does not point to this being legit. It actually points to the 14th century, and then there is a lot of, so there's an immense body of evidence that says this is legit, including the fact that nobody can reproduce this, nobody knows. And the best explanation would require essentially a nuclear weapon of amount of energy to generate the amount of energy to much more than that to actually imprint this into the shroud. And the best explanation I found for why this actually carbon dates to the 14th century is that in all of those fires that happen, right? So remember, this is not. Usually when you carbon date something, it's something that you dug out of the ground and etc. This is something that has been exposed to the elements, right? It was exposed in churches. It's contaminated, right? Yeah. And not only it's contaminated by the elements, I mean, parts of the shroud were patched because it caught fire, and then people went and tried their best to fix parts of it. So the idea is that maybe they did the carbon dating from this one piece because it was done from a single piece. Like they didn't take like multiple pieces from all over the shroud. They took a piece from the corner of the shroud, and look, very likely being the corner where people are handling it, it was probably redone in the 14th century. But what's amazing about it is that if you think again, I'm not claiming what is or isn't, but obviously I'm not in God's mind. But it's fantastic to think about that. Even when God comes and gives you like physical evidence, there is also an escape route.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, look, if you don't want to believe in this, I will give you a reason not to. I mean, you have all the reason to. Yeah. But if for whatever reason you really don't want to believe in this, there is evidence here too. And again, I find the evidence overwhelmingly towards like this is real. Yeah. But look, if I'm in the mental mode of like I don't want to believe in it, I have something to hold on to.
Yeah, yeah. That seems to be the pattern, right? Is that there's almost a I'll just mention another thing from the Book of Mormon because I think it's helpful to see why this thing would be valuable to someone like myself. But in it describes, because I've kind of suggested that agency is this like important part of us being here. And one of the prophets in the Book of Mormon argues that for real agency to exist, you need to be enticed by both sides, by both good and evil. Like they have to both be kind of desirable to a degree. And and you know, it feels like a parallel law could be that they both need to be kind of reasonable. Like they're
Yeah.
like you can kind of explain it either way, but and then ultimately, if those things are true, then it becomes your choice, and if it's your choice, then you can be held accountable for good or bad for it, which I think is kind of empowering, because what we want to get out of this life is a I don't know, a more interesting one after
Yeah.
this, and I think agency is part of the vehicle. Yeah, that coupled with
I don't even know if I want a more interesting life. I
yeah,
just want to know what the hell are we doing here?
yeah,
Like very very Greek in that sense, that like all I want to know is
just what's going on.
what's going on. Like
Yeah,
so I hope when we die we given access to that, because I don't know. We actually don't know if we given access to any of that knowledge. But I
yeah.
would love to understand, what is this all about?
Don't we all?
Don't you all? Eric, I hope I didn't disturb your vacation too much.
No.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you here, man.
Thank you, Glauber. It's been a pleasure to kind of know and interact with you. You're a really great influence in the community, and you did me the honor of coming on my podcast, and I was honored for the invite, but also felt it only appropriate to do the same.
Awesome, man. All the best. Enjoy Salt Lake City, and we'll see each other around.
Bye.